folks. Welcome to the Most Important Skill in Life podcast. I am your host, Travis Daigle, and welcome to episode 1 of the podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about what I believe to be the most important skill in life. And this is based on the podcast and just the content that I create here is based on a book that I wrote that I'm holding up here for those on YouTube, Adapt and Overcome, 3 Principles to Master the Most Important Skill in Life, Personal Ownership. The book is based on my life's journey and based on the experiences in my life that have really caused me to believe that personal ownership is the most important skill in life. Now, first, as a definition, what do I mean by personal ownership? Personal ownership is taking responsibility at all times for our actions, our beliefs, and our direction in life. Again, actions, beliefs, and our direction in life. So there's this episode today, but then over the next few weeks, there'll be 3 more episodes that go over each one of those principles in detail. And of course, please go over to travisdaigle.com. You can find the Amazon link to the book if you want like full exposition of the life stories and the journey that had me come to believe that personal ownership is the most important skill in life. And like the title of the book implies, I believe if you learn to take responsibility for your actions, beliefs, and directions at all time, you can face any challenge in life and know with confidence that you can adapt and overcome. Now, what I want to say here to kind of kickstart us is, one, I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma that I've experienced, physical and sexual abuse from time to time in the podcast. So, if you're someone who's sensitive to those types of topics, you may want to just be advised that I'm going to bring in those things up. And sometimes I'm going to talk about them in detail because they're very much a part of my story. And the other thing I want to say, just to be very clear, is I'm not asserting some sort of immutable truth here. I have come to believe that personal ownership is the most important skill in life. And by utilizing this skill, I feel like I've been able to grow and overcome, adapt and overcome in some very difficult circumstances and very turbulent situations. And so I think these ideas that I'm going to present to you in this podcast, I think you'll find some help in them. I think you'll find some of them helpful to your own life. And look, I'm going to be talking about all of life, like everything: personal finances, health and well-being, relationships, career. I always talk about 4 fundamental areas of life. I just listed them: personal health, personal finances, relationships, and work. And I'm just going to be talking a lot about mentality, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to kind of lay a foundation with these first 4 episodes so that when I refer back to these ideas, you know what I'm talking about. And so again, what is personal ownership and why is it the most important skill in life? So personal ownership, again, is taking responsibility for our actions, beliefs, and our overall direction in life. And we are often told that we need to take ownership or take responsibility. And the thing that I think I've come to learn from my life and observing other people is oftentimes when this admonition or advice comes, it's when we find ourselves in the midst of an emotionally difficult situation, an emotionally charged situation. Just some general examples that we all might relate to are, a death in the family, a natural disaster, a crash in the economy, sudden loss of work, sudden loss of relationship, financial trouble and woes, health trouble and challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And when these things come up, what I've come to believe, and my theory is that change is the hardest thing that we do in life. And when these situations pop up that ask us to change, in the article that is related to this podcast, I write, it can be something more simple. I say simple, but it can be like the changes you have to make in response to a goal you set, like wanting to change your exercise habits or start a regular exercise habit or wanting to start a budget or something like that. And it can also be the changes you have to make in response to something that's beyond your control, like the changes that everybody had to make in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, or like I mentioned earlier, a sudden death in the family, a natural disaster, a loved one, a significant other, or romantic partner breaks up with you suddenly, or you get laid off of your job. Any number of things in life that then ask us to adapt and overcome or to change. And what I feel like I've seen in myself and what I feel like I see in others is when faced with the need to change, and of course it depends on the magnitude. Well, small changes are easy, but big changes, we're talking about big changes here. When faced with the need to change, I believe that the greatest temptation in life is to blame something or someone, some force outside of ourselves, or something that is beyond our control. I believe the temptation when faced with the need to change is to blame that thing, therefore relieving us of the responsibility and the work and the challenge that comes with changing our actions, our beliefs, our direction in life. And I think what happens to us is because sometimes we hit these big clouds of emotions, and sometimes it doesn't always have to be negative emotions. It doesn't always have to be depression. It doesn't always have to be disappointment. It doesn't always have to be anger. Sometimes it can be like happiness and zeal about a situation, and we start inventing stories, et cetera, that aren't necessarily true. But particularly when we're experiencing negative emotions, it can become very easy to blame something else for the changes that we actually have to make, because it then keeps us from having to do anything. Well, the problem with that is if I don't control what I can control, because that's essentially that's what this all boils down to, controlling what you can control, then I stagnate because I'm not taking any action. And with time, people become bitter, become resentful, become remorseful for the things that they didn't do. And you can even see sometimes where people's blame intensifies with time and stagnation because they're not taking action. They're not doing the hard work to work on their belief system, to change their behaviors, to go through the process of trying to change and failing repeatedly. And that's why we avoid change, because it's difficult, right? Again, I said it was a simple thing, but something as simple as getting on a regular exercise habit. Like, people have been trying to, for as long as I've been alive, that's been a thing that people have struggled to do. And now we've got Ozempic, and there's just all these things out here that are starting to almost promise the pill that will help you get in shape and feel better. I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about these drugs. Mind you, I only have a very shallow understanding of these things. But what I am pointing out here is that, clearly people have a very difficult time changing their behavior when it comes to exercise and it comes to healthy habits, which I think is why we search and we gravitate towards these things that we think are easy fixes. We have a narrative that this thing will solve my problem, rather than doing that hard work that comes with changing ourselves. So when faced with the need to change, the greatest temptation is to blame something outside of ourselves, and this alleviates us from the responsibility to change. But the problem is we stagnate, and stagnation can cause us to become bitter, resentful, and intensify our blame and our frustration and our anger at the thing we're blaming, when really we're probably just mad at ourselves for doing nothing. Therefore, the greatest skill and most important skill in life is the ability to see through your negative, positive emotions, your lust, your desire, your rage, your anger, your pissed offness, to be able to see through those emotions and see the truth. The truth of what? The truth of what you can control, and start controlling it. Actions, beliefs, direction in life. Now, in order to help us better understand this, I want to take us back to when I went off to college. Now, to give us a brief little understanding of this, and you can read more about this journey on my website at travisdaigle.com. I'll have the link to the article that I wrote that correlates to this podcast, but then you can also go to the About section to get some more background. But basically, I grew up a very obese kid. At one point, I was 10 years old. I weighed 180 pounds. It was around that time when I decided to start working out. A lot of that was in response to bullying and teasing at school. And eventually, I found myself at my heaviest. I was 17 years old and I weighed 305 pounds. Go to the website and take a look at that picture to see that. But at 17 years old, I weigh 305 pounds. And at this point, I have been trying steadily for 7 years with intense exercise routines, and also trying and failing to change my dietary habits. But it was in that year, it was January 2000, and I weighed 305, and it was at that time that I was in my senior year of high school. It was the final semester, so it was the last semester, senior year of high school. And I was able to make some changes to my diet. I stopped drinking soda, stopped eating sweets, stopped eating fast food, stopped eating fried food. And I would allow myself one meal a week to break those rules. And in the 8 months between January and August, in that 8 month time period before I went off to college at the University of Houston, because at the time I was living in Birmingham, Alabama with my parents, but I would go to college at the University of Houston in August of 2000. In that 8 month period, I ended up losing 80 pounds. And this until this day, I'm 42 now. So I was 18 then. We're talking 24, 25 years ago. This is still the most cathartic experience I've ever had in my life. And why was it so cathartic? Well, when I got off to college, part of the reason I went to Houston, part of the reason I left Alabama and went to Houston, Texas, is because I sort of had it in my mind that I could leave my childhood behind and leave all of the bullying behind, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, I'd also been physically and sexually abused by my older sister when I was little. But, I grew up from up till age 10, I grew up with a single mom. It was me, my older sister, and my mom. And my mom was single at the time. And, life was a struggle for us. And when I got to college in the year 2000, one of the problems that I had was, yes, I had lost all this weight, and it was a massive transformation. It was a massive positive transformation for me that I'd been working so hard to do for 7 years. And in the midst of dealing with being called fat and ugly and being belittled maybe not every day, but like being belittled often at school and being embarrassed by my peers often, and in some cases even having teachers berate me and belittle me in front of other students because of my my lack of physical abilities. Again, that's something you can read more about in the book. But basically, I had learned to, outside of school, when I was growing up, K through 12, I isolated myself. And the reason I isolated myself from my peers was because my peers were often the source of my greatest pains and frustrations. Being called names all the time, being belittled all the time, etc. And so when I was growing up, my mom used to ask me why I never hung out with anybody. And I can't even remember what I used to tell her. But I remember she would ask that question, and I almost thought it was like it was almost like an alien question to me back then, because I was just like, in my head, I was like, why would I want to hang out with anybody when the only thing people do to me is they talk about me like I'm a piece of garbage? Why would I ever invite that into my life willingly when I can be away from it? So I used to love the summertime, and I used to hate school. Because in the summertime I could just be by myself and I could, work on working out and trying to improve myself. But then I always had to go back to school and go right back to the bullying until January 2000 when I finally started that weight loss process. But here's the problem with isolating yourself like that. When I got to college, I thought I could leave behind all the painful experiences of the past. Well, of course, not so much. And one of the biggest issues, or one of the big things that I didn't understand, my social skills were very underdeveloped. I was very immature socially. One of the things that I did not understand was, your friends joke with you, they poke at you, they pick fun at you. But for me, joking and picking fun at me was always malicious. People were always laughing at me, not laughing with me. And it was never like a thing of, we say sometimes that, the way people know that we love them is that we do mess with them. Like if I didn't love you, I wouldn't mess with you, right? We say that, but I didn't have that understanding when I hit college. And so I would sometimes, as a freshman in college, I would have these big blow ups at people I was trying to form friendships with. And they would say something or do something and it would trigger me and I would just explode almost uncontrollably. And I'm yelling and I'm, making these big movements with my body. I'm still a big guy. I'm not over 300 pounds anymore, but I'm still 225 pounds, 6'3". I'm a young, strong guy. And of course, rightfully so, this would intimidate people and scare people sometimes. And people didn't understand my behavior. But I knew what was going on. Fortunately, I understood what was going on. I realized that I'm being triggered by situations that other people feel are normal. But to me, they aren't normal because they remind me of all the belittling and bullying that I went through as a kid growing up. To further complicate things, and this is where sexual and physical abuse come in, at the time, I'm 18 years old. At the time, I didn't know that I had been physically and sexually abused by my older sister. I had these faint, like scattered memories, but I always thought they were like dreams just caught up in my subconscious. And in particular, I used to think that the memories I had of sexual abuse were like my own deviance. Like, why am I having these memories of doing things with my sister? Something must be wrong with me. Oh, and it just kind of fit with the narrative of being in isolation, being picked on by the other kids. I used to eat to self-medicate, which is why I was obese, but I also used to watch pornography to self-medicate. And like all these narratives in isolation play off each other. And so not only are there problems with being triggered by, teasing or whatever, but there's also like issues, like challenges that I have with, at that time anyway, this is in 2000 when I'm a freshman in college, difficulty that I have with assertive women, because you got to remember, my sister was physically abusive. My mother, while not physically or sexually abusive in any way, she was a single mom struggling, and so she could be very domineering and short tempered at times. And so I'm a little kid, a little boy in this environment with these two older women who are struggling for various reasons, and I'm taking sort of the brunt of the things that they're going through, right? And when I was in college, like I just had no awareness of these things. And all I knew was this. I just knew one thing. And this is where we talk about direction. I knew that I wanted to have friends because I never had friends before. I knew I wanted a girlfriend because I never had a girlfriend before. I wanted to be in relationships. I wanted to have a normal life like other people, and I did not want to be a prisoner to my past. So I didn't fully understand what was going on with me, but I knew that in order to have relationships with people, they needed to feel safe with me. If they didn't feel safe with me, they would never understand me. I would never get the opportunity to tell them my story. And man, like still to this day, what was so heartbreaking about that time that that's my freshman year in college. You know, if you can imagine for a moment, losing all that weight and leaving high school, it was like I broke out of prison because school had just always been this place of like misery for me because I was always anxious, I was always nervous around people. So when I went off to college, I had hopes of it being this like, I don't know, maybe like this magical place where I could like start life over again and be a different person. But clearly, very quickly, as I'm trying to form relationships with people, I'm realizing that that's not going to happen. And so I've got to deal with my past. And still, one of the most difficult things about that time, heartbreaking, sometimes I still tear up when I think about it, is in order to try to repair the mistakes and the fallouts from blowing up at people, I had to have the humility to go ahead and apologize and try to explain myself. You know, I I didn't want to like dump my whole life on people, but I had to say like I'm sorry for my behavior. I'm sorry that I yelled at you. That that wasn't you didn't deserve that, et cetera, et cetera. And what was so difficult about having to apologize to people, what was so difficult was at that point in my life, like nobody had ever apologized to me. My classmates never apologized for the things they said to me or said about me. The teachers that had, berated me multiple times. This was like when I was in PE back then. PE teachers that had like berated me in front of my classmates for, not running fast enough or not being able to do a pull up or something like that. Nobody ever said a word of I'm sorry to me. At that time, my sister later on after I graduated college, she admitted that she had physically and sexually abused me, but she never said anything about it then, and my mother again had her own struggles at that time, and she wasn't one to apologize for her behavior. And so what was so hard for me was to ask forgiveness from other people when nobody had ever asked for forgiveness from me. To to know that I had to know that I'm now apologizing for my behavior to other people, and knowing that a lot of that unruly aggressive behavior came from trauma inflicted on me by other people who never apologized to me at that point. It in the article I say it felt like cosmically and galactically unjust. It felt so unfair. But the reality is I I'm choosing to do something in asking for forgiveness and apologizing that is the thing that I wanted other people to do for me, right? Golden rule, so to speak, right? I'm doing unto others as I would have them do unto me. I'm being the change in the world that I want to see. But man, it was hard, y'all. It was so difficult. And so what am I doing? I don't fully understand what's going on inside of me, but I can take responsibility for my actions, right? I can go to people humbly, ask for forgiveness, and apologize, taking responsibility for my actions. I can also accept the fact that, look, I had a lot to work on, y'all. So some relationships never repaired. Some people never forgave me. I've damaged several important relationships over the last 42 years of my life because of the baggage and the fallout of the things that I experienced growing up. And all I can do, and I'm remorseful for that, and all I can do is keep trying to develop my awareness of my patterns of behavior and keep observing when my social norms are not most people's social norms. And I'm taking action, through self-reflection, through self-awareness. Also taking responsibility for my beliefs in the moment. Like I had this belief that I had left my childhood behind, right? Well, here I was, and young people do this. Here I was at 18, just realizing just how much baggage I was carrying. And I mean, I'm 42 two now, and I'll talk about a little bit more about this in the next episode. I'm 42 now. I still have night terrors from some of the things that, unfortunately, my older sister did to me when she was still alive, when I was little. And I didn't know. Look, I wouldn't have a girlfriend till after college, and I didn't know that I had night terrors till I got married a couple years ago, and me and my or really before when we moved in together, she was still my girlfriend at the time, but my wife would tell me like, "Hey, you wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, and sometimes your eyes are open reaching for stuff, and then you go back to sleep. Do you know that you do that?" And I was like, "What? I do what?" Because I hadn't lived with anybody. I hadn't been in any, like super close long-term relationships until I met my wife. And so, I'm in therapy right now for that. And my whole life I haven't been in therapy. Because I've managed to adapt and overcome. Like I believe you can. I don't say that to say I'm some superhuman. I say that to say I am human and I make mistakes, but I've still been able to accomplish some significant things in my life. Weight loss was one thing. Getting my engineering degree, graduating with honors was another thing. I left engineering, ended up in a bunch of debt, but then joined the military, became a U.S. Army Green Beret and a combat veteran, paid off all my debt while I was in the military. And now, for the last 10 years or so, I've been writing, did a little bit of speaking for a while, now getting into YouTubing again and podcasting. But I've been able to adapt and overcome the trials of my past. And again, to go back to our example from me in college for the first time, apologizing was about taking ownership of my direction, because the being triggered and getting angry and blowing up at people was taking me in a direction of isolation and no relationships. But my vision and my goal for myself was to have relationships. So I was ready to do what I needed to do to change the direction of my life. And it started with what I had to be able to do logically was see through my emotions, see through my anger, see through my rage, see through those triggers, and implement this skill of controlling what I can control to move towards the goal, which was and still is healthy relationships. So, okay, Travis, right now, because you're allowing these things to trigger you, people don't feel safe with you, so you're going to end up in isolation. No girlfriend, no friends, no social life. Is that what you want? No. Okay, apologize. Yes, it feels unjust, and it feels cosmically wrong because no one ever apologized to me. And this is something I write about in the book. Oftentimes, I think, let me pick it up on my computer screen here because I wanna get the quote correct, because this is a very important thing that we all need to understand. So in the book I write, when I reflect upon this particular time in my life, that I'm talking about when I'm in college here, when I reflect upon this particular time in my life, I see how much I was holding on to my own pain. I think we often feel that our freedom from an emotional burden is tied to someone else's admission of guilt. I think this sets us up to live in a perpetual state of holding grievances against someone or something. This was limiting my ability to connect with others. So, I mean, that says it all right there, y'all. Like, I at that time, I'm 18 and I'm really having and I'm getting into social scenarios really for the first time in my life. And I have to admit, like, I was just socially immature and underdeveloped, and I didn't understand. I wasn't ready for what was coming. And if I wanted to form relationships, and like I said again, it's we often feel that our freedom from an emotional burden is tied to someone else's admission of guilt. Cosmically unjust. Why do I have to apologize when nobody else apologized to me? But I want to release that trauma. I want to grow past my past, right? I don't want to remain prisoner to my past experiences. So I got to humble myself. I got to take ownership, the most important skill in life. Why is it so important? Is because change usually comes with these like emotional blinders that that keep us from seeing reality and seeing the truth that if we acknowledge it probably will help us move forward in a positive direction. And that's what I had to do. And over the next 3 episodes, I'm going to go over each principle. I'm going to go deeper into the weight loss journey and deeper into my childhood, as we talk about taking responsibility for actions. Then I'm going to, in the third episode, I'm going to go deeper into college and the transition I made away from engineering as I was preparing to join the military. And that's where we're gonna talk about taking responsibility for our beliefs, because we're gonna talk about how everybody has a story. And then finally, we're gonna talk about my time in the military and what what that revealed to me, and why it's so important to take responsibility for your direction by maintaining a vision in life. But again, like, no immutable truths here, y'all. I just believe that we got to control what we can control, y'all. And when we don't do that, we often I think we end up feeling, what would I say? I think even just a lot of what we see in the world today, where people are so frustrated and so angry, we're blaming each other a lot in the world today. And I think a lot of that has to do with, there has to be more voices like my own. And this isn't a new idea, y'all. Control what you can control. This has probably been around since humans have been able to communicate through language with each other. People have probably wrestled with this thing of being pissed off because they gotta evolve and they know they gotta change, and deciding, well, instead of me changing, I'm gonna blame those people over there. That way I don't have to do anything, right? That people have probably been, the Stoics talked about this. I believe that the Bible talks about this. Buddhism talks about this. Like, it's been around forever. And I just think we need more and more and more voices out there reminding ourselves, reminding each other, reminding everybody around us, you need to control what you can control. Now, the hard part is this. When emotions come, we can feel so lost. And when somebody comes to us and says, you need to take ownership, or you need to take responsibility, like, sometimes it's just hard to know what that means when, I don't know, you're addicted to drugs and you've like ruined your whole life and your life is in shambles, and somebody comes to you and says, take responsibility. Like, I'm not saying that my principles will necessarily make it massively easier, but sometimes when you are in the middle of like a tornado, and you're in the, or like you're in the fog or the chaos of warring with your life, you need some kind of pathway that you can see. You need some kind of some ability to put together a plan in front of you so you can move forward. And so my hope is, with these 3 skills, you're able to better see through your emotions, because our emotions can blind us. Our lusts, our desires, they can blind us to the truth of what we need to do to move our lives in a direction that's right for us. So y'all, this is the first episode, and hopefully I'm going to be able to keep this up for a long time. But if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure to follow the podcast, and make sure to go to travisdaigle.com, subscribe to the blog, where you'll get the articles before the podcast and whatnot come out. This post posted today is I'm recording this on October 18th, 2024. And so this is going to come out in January 2025. So if you subscribe to the blog, you'll get the ideas way ahead of time. Remember, that's over at travisdaigle.com. You can also find a link to my book, Adapt and Overcome: 3 Principles to Master the Most Important Skill in Life, personal ownership. I'll talk to y'all on episode 2.